Hey everybody, Beardodood here with another episode of Stoneshard Podcast, and with me today is DarLeeLlama.
Hey everybody, how you doing? DarLeeLlama here. Today we are doing requested by the audience, Geomancy versus Pyromancy. Two of our, in fact, the only magic schools out at the moment. So naturally, we had to compare these two. It's not like we compare it with anything else. The power of Earth versus the power of Fire, which will reign supreme? You be the judge, and so will we at the end of this video. Be sure to stay tuned for that, but let's get started. We're going to start off with Geomancy to begin with. Geomancy, very, very strong. As said by many of the people all around the actual fandom of the game. Definitely stronger when it first came out, but they did a little switching, I think, on some of the skills and abilities to kind of tone her down. But still strong across the board for its massive amount of stun effects and daze effects, combos, and synergies. Definitely great paired with maces. The very first ability we're going to start off by talking, Runic Boulder. It is one of the most basic abilities of, and in fact, the starter ability of the Geomancy tree, aside from Stone Armor. Type, target tile, range vision, energy 20, cooldown 2. The fact that it has a range of vision, by the way, means that as long as you can see it, so it actually has a very long range. Modified by magic power, geomantic power, and spells energy cost. Raises a runic boulder in the targeted tile. It deals 6 times MP times GP, arcane damage to all adjacent enemies, with a 50 plus MP times GP % chance to inflict knockback. Each runic boulder with vision provides the caster with a stack of runic empowerment, which will give plus 10% magic power, plus 15% geomantic power, minus 10% abilities energy cost, minus 7.5% damage taken. It costs 3 energy per turn, and Boulder's durability depends on the caster's max energy. Boulders crumble when out of the caster's vision or when the caster runs out of energy. If a boulder is destroyed by the caster's enemy, the caster is stunned for 3 turns. You can't have more than 3 boulders simultaneously. It has a passive bonus of plus 2.5% geomantic power. And I will go ahead and say pretty much all of the skills and abilities will have a passive bonus of geomantic or pyromantic power within spell trees. So there's not a lot to discuss there. Before we go any further, I do want to go ahead and mention one thing. 6 times MP times GP refers to magic power and geomantic power. There is a special formula that the game uses to calculate MP and GP within this formula. It is, in fact, your magic power divided by 100. So if you have 150% magic power, you are actually getting a bonus of 1.5. So when we first talk about it, it may seem like a lot, but in fact, it depends on the actual calculation. Geomantic power is also calculated differently. It is 1 plus your geomantic power divided by 100. So it has its own special formula. We recommend that rather than going and trying to do the mathematics, that you go to the Stoneshard official wiki page and look up the individual trees, Pyromancy and Geomancy, to see what those exact values are. But what you really need to know is the higher the base value, the better the damage. And the more that you have of either of those, the more that it gets multiplied. That being said, back to you, Beardo. What do you think of this ability?
I mean, this is really just the cornerstone of the entire tree. You can't really do the majority of the spells without having it. There's so many different uses for it outside of just the additional spells that you can cast off of it. Like you said, it's really good for mace builds. It's good for blocking vision for enemies. Again, all around, it's definitely an interesting skill compared to most of the other stuff that we have in the game. There obviously the main issue with having it set up this way is that you're always kind of having to wait Any spell is really going to take 2 turns compared to Pyromancy is only going to take 1. But there's a very strong AoE damage from a lot of the spells that you can do.
I would agree with that assessment. The damage isn't as good as one might expect, though. Fire Barrage will use a similar damage calculation, but Fire Barrage hits 3 times, whereas this only hits once. So in reality, this ability doesn't do a ton of damage by itself, but it's a setup ability. It's a setup for another particular ability, which we will talk about later, which is the Spikes ability, the Spikes spell. And they basically are reliant upon one another. Buff-wise, this does give lots of great buffs. You know, it gives you plus 25% overall to your magical ability to do damage. It does help you reduce your energy costs, and it does have a tankiness factor with the damage taken. The only big problem with it is its limitation of 3 boulders and the fact that it costs a ton of energy per turn. If you are not actually set up to be able to sustain a lot of boulders at once, this can quickly drain your mana. So it can be limiting, is what I want to say. You don't want to just pop up 3 and have these up as a buff. You know, you don't want that. It's not like a stance. These will actually cost you in the long run, and they are not meant to be they're not meant to keep around for a long time.
Yeah, and on top of that, they when they start getting damage, it actually does have negative consequences for you as well, to the point where if the enemy actually destroys it, I believe can cause a dazed state. So it can really mess you up at the same time. So it's kind of good and bad in those regards, and definitely something to keep in mind when you're messing with it. It is probably one of the more interesting skills in the game, just because of how many different uses and how it affects your character and affects other characters, and it sets up for chaining multiple spells. It gives you buffs, and there's so much that these little boulders do compared to a lot of the other stuff that you could do in the game, or different skills.
Yeah, it's kind of polarizing, I would actually say, in that respect, in that you have 2 on one hand, left hand and right hand. You've got a pro and a con set that comes with this. You know, on the pro, it can knock back, and knockback is typically good. You know, it also comes with a bunch of buffs and it does damage, arcane damage. You know, on the negative side, it drains your mana, and it has the ability to really screw you because you get stunned. And that has actually happened to me in the game, and it mattered, where I ended up taking a lot more damage than I needed to because they broke through my boulder. I had set it up incorrectly in a corridor, for example. I used it to block the enemy from getting to me. Unfortunately, since they had no other way to get to me except through the boulder, they smashed through the boulder, and that stunned me. So all the time that I actually gained from having the boulder up, I ended up losing, and they ended up jumping on me and swinging on me twice, and it was not great. So definitely a pro and con type ability, but definitely very iconic for this school. Let's go on to the next ability. We are going to be going through the abilities. Wrong direction.
Oops.
There we go. We're going to be going through the abilities as they are linked to their primaries. So Rune of Enfeeblement is primarily linked to Runic Boulder. It is a passive. I believe you can get it in Earth 1, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's part of the... Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's part of Earth 1.
So enemies standing next to a Runic Boulder will suffer minus 10% physical resistance, making them easier to deal physical damage to. Minus 15% move resistance and minus 15% control resistance, which affects immobilization, confusion, stun, and daze. It gives a passive bonus of 2.5% geomantic power and an additional 5% fortitude. So it does have an additional passive. What do you think about this ability, Darley? I mean, Beardo.
I mean, it kind of always comes down to having passives that augment abilities. I mean, the thing is with the boulders, they are already pretty strong as is. So, and this is one of those rare cases where there's actually two passives connected to a single skill. But all the additional resistances that it does, and then of course adding the geomantic power is nice. The fortitude's kind of weird, and as we've said a number of times, we've passed up on that. But if you want to get to that final skill that's going to give even more boost to your boulders, you're going to have to go through this one. And usually when you're early game, if you're trying to go pure geo, you're going to have those 3 skills, and those first 3 levels or 2 or 3 levels, you're pretty much going to end up using it anyways.
Yes, I agree. When I read this passive, it actually, I didn't care too much for it when it was worded the way it was previously, but when it changed to move resistance and control resistance, I had a little more respect for it, right? Because it directly affects the knockback chance that Runic Boulder procs. What I'm wondering, actually, is does Rune of Enfeeblement kick in automatically as soon as the boulder comes into effect? Does it in fact mean that when it pops up and does its knockback attempt, you are getting the benefit of the minus 15% move and control resistance?
I was of the opinion that any of these runes, and same with the Pyromancy too, it just augments the spell. So anytime you pop off a boulder, you're going to get those resistances are going to take effect.
I would say as well that should be the case. If it is not the case, I would not like this passive near as much. But as it is, if it can in fact help you knock back and increase your knockback percentages by an extra 15%, I see a lot more value for this passive than I have in the past. That being said, it really depends on how good your knockback is and whether or not it's worth it for you to use Boulder to knock people back. Typically, that is what you want to use the Boulder for, I feel. I feel the boulder is meant to basically buy you time. If you set up a boulder and they have to walk around it and they get knocked back by it, it buys you a lot more time to basically shoot off spells. And when you're playing any kind of caster, that's basically what you want to do. You want the more spells you can get off on them before they actually get in contact with you, the better. Right? So in that respect, this passive does do its job to that degree.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about as well with the addition of the crossbows, if an early game Geomancer would benefit from using crossbows and just popping off boulders to get in the way. Because, I mean, that one problem is when you're starting Geo, this is your only offensive spell. You can get, I think, stone armor as well, which we'll talk about. But early game, you're really going to be limited, whereas with Pyromancy, you kind of start off with Fire Barrage, which seems a lot more conventional as far as dealing damage. So I think I was just wondering, it would probably be interesting to try to use your crossbow at the beginning of your pyro build and just pop off the boulders to block off the enemy from directly coming to you.
I can tell you right now that I just did that ranged build set of videos, and I would have loved to have had Runic Boulder be able to help control so many times. But I couldn't do that because that was not part of the challenge. So I definitely feel like that is very synergistic. You know, if you decide to use maces or if you decide to use bows and arrows with Geomancy, it's very strong together, I feel.
Yeah, it just seems as if Geomancy has more synergies with other types of combat, especially with melee, compared to Pyromancy.
Yes, I do feel Geomancy pairs well with many other trees. I wouldn't say that necessarily about Pyromancy, but we'll get to that. All right, let's move on to our next ability. Which is Rune of Binding. It's another passive ability. Raising a Runic Boulder grants minus 25% abilities energy cost for the next turn. Passive bonus 2.5%. Geomantic power plus 3% energy restoration. How do you feel about this one, Beardo?
I think this one definitely pays off later in the game when you're using the boulders to pop off all your spells. That 25% seems very nice. So it almost makes it where a lot of the passives I think in this tree, or at least this beginning ones, seem as if they're really necessary to really get the full utilization of all of the spells in for Geomancy.
I agree. And that this definitely is a setup ability. When you use this passive, when you pop up a Runic Boulder, you're already getting a nice little bonus to your abilities energy cost reduction. This one further increases it. So really what this to me means is you want to hit him with a big spell cost ability when you use this one. You want to use Earthquake or Boulder Toss or something big, something that's really going to matter energy wise. But it's like you said, since we're basically popping up, Runic Boulders all the time, this gets used a lot. It's very, very energy efficient in that respect for your other spells. So definitely good passive to have. And I like the actual passive bonus to this. 3% energy restoration may not seem to make a huge difference to some people because, most of the time we're going to be basically sitting down and recovering all of our energy in that manner. But it also really helps if you have to actually regenerate some energy in mid-combat. So do not neglect your energy restoration. I do like this passive. I think it's a lot better than some people may give it granted.
Well, and to contrast it too, when I did a build with Geomancy, and I actually skipped over these passives, and I definitely felt the hit later on of how much the other abilities cost to use. So in those regards, if you really are looking at going primarily Geomancy, even if you're just going to be having as like a supplemental skill, it really does seem like these are super necessary. Otherwise, you're just going to be burning a lot of energy, especially the later skills.
I definitely agree with that. In fact, I would make the statement that any school of magic that we've seen so far, by obviously Pyro and Geomancy being the ones that setting the standard for magic, right? Because that's what everyone's familiar with. The more you have of the tree, the better it is. While Geomancy is definitely probably a lot more splashable than Fire might be, because like it goes well with maces, it might go well with ranged. The fact of the matter is that the more you have of a particular school, the stronger it gets. It's built that way because of the passive bonuses. And I feel like every single ability in both trees, Geo and Pyro, they're very, very synergistic. They make their basic abilities get better and better and better. And you need to have those in order to make the best of it and the most of it. So you're kind of shorting yourself if you don't go all the way in a tree, unless your intention is only to make use of certain abilities. For example, the armor. So
yeah, I mean, if you just want to use the boulders with your melee to block people in and stuff, then by all means just get that one skill and ignore the others, or maybe get this one and the next skill we'll talk about, the stone armor. But if you're gonna go deep in and you want to use stone spikes, earthquake, boulder toss, all of those, you really do need to look at these first two passives for the Runic Boulder.
Agree. Let's move on to the next ability. We're going back to level 1. Stone armor. Active, type, target self. Energy 25, cooldown 32. Modified by magic power, geomantic power, and runic empowerment stacks. Activates the following effect for 3 turns. We get 30% physical resistance, 50% nature resist, 20% magic resist, 100% bleed resist, plus 50% move resist, and at the end of the duration, stone armor will explode, dealing 2 times MP plus GP, crushing damage for each attack it absorbed, with 33 times MP plus GP percent chance to inflict knockback on all adjacent enemies. Each stack of runic power prolongs the duration of the effect by 4 turns. Raising new boulders prolongs the duration of the effect by 2. Passive bonus 2.5% Geomancy power. What do you think, Beardo?
This is actually a really nice skill regardless of which school of magic you go into. It kind of reminds me of how we were talking about having that oh crap button, where, you know, obviously as using magic, you're going to want to stay as far away from the enemies as possible, but when they come in close, this just gives you that additional shield. And then of course there's the niceness of it exploding and doing even more damage. So yeah, and as far as both skill trees, I really think that this one is high up there and should be considered, regardless of if you're going Pyro or Geo.
I think this ability is one of those key abilities that really stands the two schools apart, and that Geomancy really is more defensive focused. It has the ability to deal that damage, and that's probably one of the reasons why it is so naturally considered to be good by a lot of people. I know when I played my Pyro build, I actually relied on stone armor against the troll because he was throwing boulders at me and I needed some way to survive. So since it was a bunch of physical damage, being able to just hit stone armor when I saw the shadow coming and I had no way to get out of range definitely kept me in the game. The fact that it gives so many different good resistances is a blessing. And that 30% physical resistance, even though it's one of the smaller ones of the ability, it actually counts for a lot, because physical resistance actually means plus 30% to each individual each individual type of physical damage. So it's actually 30% rending, 30% piercing, 30% crushing, and 30% slashing. And then of course nature all on its own. It's a really great ability. I mean, it's really defensive, super defensive, and it gets better by having boulders out. You know, it lasts longer. You know, 3 turns is good enough, in my opinion. The fact that you can actually preset your boulders up and have it prolong your stone armor is even better. So definitely a worthwhile ability. I know we're in agreement for this. I actually wanted to experiment to see in the past if it was possible to eat death caps by having 100% poison resistance, and you could actually eat a death cap with this and get a higher poison resistance and maybe not take so much poison damage. But I don't know if that actually would work.
It would definitely
I've never tested it.
It'd definitely be an interesting test for science, you know?
Yeah, test for science. But that's another way you can apply it. My point being is that, let's say you see a snake and you're getting poisoned all of a sudden, you know, pop up some stone armor and get some of that natural poison resistance, you know, or any other thing. Actually, I don't know if it actually helps resist against ongoing effects. Would stone armor actually prevent bleeding if you had bleeding on you? Like,
I don't
would
think
it reduce it?
No, I think that's when you start moving into the realm of fortitude. The resistance, the way that I understand it, is those are supposed to stop it from happening or reduce the chance that it's going to happen. But once it happens, I don't think it has much of any effect.
Yeah, I think you're right. So, like, stone armor thus is really good against poison type creatures, i.e. snakes, or let's say we're in, you know, the vampire dungeon and we're up against that abomination that loves to basically rip you open, or maybe in the human dungeon when you've got the guy with the 2 daggers in the hood and they love to use bleed effects. Pop up stone armor and you're basically golden for 3 turns. Definitely a strong ability. One of my favorites.
Yeah, and another one of those that you don't have to be a geomancer to make use of it. If you're going something like and I hadn't even thought of it either, but going a dual wield run, having this would definitely be useful. Considering the low protection and low resistances, you can at least get that for a little bit if your dodge isn't connecting right.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the most dippable abilities of this particular school of magic. And I tend to pick up stone armor in a lot of builds if I'm doing like kind of like a potluck build or a jack of all trades type build. You know, stone armor I believe is definitely worth the point because you get so much. Just like Runic Boulder, very situationally good. So definitely a thumbs up from me. Let's move on to the next ability, which is Petrification. Type, target object 3x3 area, range of 6, active ability, energy 20, cooldown 24, modified by MP, GP, and RES, Runic Empowerment stacks. It deals 8 times MP times GP arcane damage to all targets in the area of effect with 50 times MP plus GP times 1 plus res percent chance to petrify them for 4 to 5 turns. I definitely hope you passed basic algebra in order to understand all of this. Each petrified enemy within your vision grants you plus 15% geomantic power, and it gives a passive bonus of 2.5% geomantic power. What do you think of this one?
I think out of all the geomancy skills, it's rather underwhelming. I mean, it definitely has its place where it's like another oh crap button where you can pop it off. I mean, you kind of gotta hope that it's going to basically do the petrification, but the problem is once the enemy's petrified, like, you really only use this to run away because once they're petrified, you're not going to be doing any damage to them. So yeah, to me, it's one of those ones where I typically would pass if I was going to be playing Pyromancy.
Geomancy.
Oh, Geomancy, sorry.
It's interesting that you feel that way. I feel that way too. I tend to overlook this ability a lot. It has very high cooldown at 24. It has above moderate energy cost at 20, you know. But it does have a range of 6, you know, which is actually very long. And it does hit, you know, kind of a small fireball area, 3x3 area. So, I mean, statistically in that respect, it should be pretty good. I think damage-wise, it actually compares with, I want to say, Blaze or something like that. Maybe one of the other fire abilities, because it's 8 as compared to 6. So it does do a moderate amount of damage. And it does have a control aspect to it that is uncommon in that we petrify, you know. Petrify can be pretty powerful, but it's also kind of like, how reliable will it be, you know? The fact that it can petrify for 4 to 5 turns is great, because that's a pretty long time. You know, a minimum of 4 is good. And it does buff you. You know, everything about this, I want to say it's actually a really good ability, but I almost never get it. I always overlook it. You know, I really should not. Because, you know, when I see this ability, you know, I want to use it. You know, I want to take down the enemy. You know, I don't want to necessarily lock them down for that long, you know. So, but then on the other hand, I've said in the past, you know, being able to control your enemy is basically winning the war. So, I don't know. I should like this ability, but for some reason I never make it a go-to. You know, it's weird.
Well, and I mean, I think it kind of gets into the problem too, is that we basically have 14 skills to choose from. You're probably not going to get to level 13 or 14 where you would make use of every skill. And if you're really looking to control the battlefield and like just keep the enemy where you want them, that's really when like stone spikes, which we're going to get into next, is really going to come into play more, because the problem, like I said, with petrifying the enemy, you're gonna make them so you can't actually do any damage. So really the only thing that I could see it being used for is either you need to run away, or maybe you want to try to use it for hunting so you can keep the animal like in the same spot for a few turns. But the petrification, maybe if the petrification was like 100% chance, then it would be really cool. But I had plenty of times where I tested out this skill, and I'd say it's probably like 50% or less that you're going to get that petrification. And when you're trying to run away and you're going to use that skill and it doesn't connect, you wasted the energy to do so, and like your turn to just run away from the target. So I can see why someone would want to use it, especially if you're not looking, you know, or you're early on where you don't have a lot of skills and you really feel that you need to build out the skill tree. But again, I just think it's one of those ones where you just save that skill point, you get Stone Spike, and you get some of these other ones further down. I mean, obviously there is the benefit in that this is, aside from Stone Armor, is really the only one that you don't have to spend a boulder to use. You could just pop it off at your convenience. But I think when you start getting into, you're really going to get used to strategizing your combat using the boulder. So I don't know. That's why to me, generally this one is a pass, especially since I've gotten it and I felt like I kind of got burned by it a little bit. So
yeah, I usually make a dive towards certain skills, which I agree. I think that's what you do too, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we try and make a dive towards the skills that we want. In particular, of that, you know, boulder toss is going to be one of the number ones. You know, because it becomes basically a bread and butter skill. You know, it's basically what a lot of people start using to take down their opponents with. I don't think 100% petrify would solve the problems that petrification has, but I think an interesting idea would be, and I don't know if you can actually do this, but if you could actually use boulder toss on petrified enemies and toss them around, that could be interesting.
Or even,
so, do you know if that's the case? Can you do that?
It would be cool. The other thing too is maybe if you use boulder toss, it breaks the petrification and does damage on impact or something. I'm sure that there's something creative that can be done with it.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement with that. But yeah, it just, I guess to us, this is just a little underwhelming. It shouldn't be, but it kind of is. So maybe I need to play around with it more and give it a second chance, you know, but as it is, it's kind of a pass skill for me, and I think it is for you too.
Yeah, same for me.
All right, let's go on to the next one. This is the skill that Beardo just mentioned, Stone Spikes. It is pretty much the other combo. Actually, I would maybe even say it's the main spell combo that people will find themselves using whenever you go into this particular school of magic. By using Runic Boulders into Stone Spikes will become like a major form of damage for the Geomancer. Stone Spikes active type, target object 3x3 area, range of vision, so very long vision, energy of 30, very high energy cost, not that great, cooldown 8, which is actually good. Modified by magic power and Geomancy, destroys targeted Runic Boulder, summoning Stone Spikes on each adjacent tile. Spikes deal 12 times MP plus GP piercing and 3 times MP plus GP crushing, with a 60 times MP plus GP chance of knockback. Affected empty tiles maintain their spikes for 8 turns. Their durability depends on the caster's max energy. With Rune of Fortifying taken, crushing damage becomes 5 times MP plus GP. Passive bonus 2.5% Geomancy power. What do you think, Beardo?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it goes hand in hand with the boulder. Definitely complements it very well. There's a lot that you can do with it in terms of just creating walls or barriers between you and the enemy to set up for other spells. The high energy cost does kind of suck, but if you're willing to put the points into the other 2 passives, that kind of helps offset it a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I think it's essential for keeping control of the landscape of how the battle's gonna go. It's not really like super powerful in doing damage, but it will keep, if you need to buy time, it will keep the enemy in place, and I think a lot better than using petrification. And then the bonus too being that you basically creating 9 small runic boulders that when the enemy's hitting them, they don't hurt you, and they do have high resistance and HP too, depending on your magic power and stuff like that.
If you think of Runic Boulder as being let's create a wall, Stone Spikes is creating even more wall.
Yeah, exactly.
I definitely think that Rune of Binding was made with Stone Spikes in mind. As you said, you know, I mean, the energy cost is pretty big, but getting that 25% cuts it down to 22.5, reduced further. Well, I don't know if the actual reduction to the Runic Boulder would still go into place, but I want to assume it would be. But it would be reduced a further amount by the runic stacks that you have, the RES, Runic Empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, definitely, you know, deals good damage. 12, the 12 base damage for the spikes, you know, is very respectable. It does piercing, which, you know, I think piercing is supposed to be one of the weakest types of damage you can deal, just because so many things have resistances towards that. But it also does crushing, and that can be buffed by the Rune of Fortifying, as mentioned. So, you know, the fact that it does deal 2 different kinds of damage is very nice. And of course, it's got the knockback, which we all love. I think the only setback, obviously, is the fact that it is a combo spell and that you have to chain it, and the fact that it has that high energy count, which can be mitigated, but that needs to be dependent upon talents. Is it worth getting those talents to mitigate it? Yes. So I'm still giving this ability a thumbs up. Definitely one of the staples as we go down the tree. So
yeah, and I mean,
and the range is great too on vision. Having a range of vision is always good, I feel, because it just gives you such a long range.
Well, and it basically wreaks havoc in the dungeons, because if you pop off Runic Boulder to block yourself from the enemy, if they're hitting it, that's bad news for you. But if you do Stone Spike, you're basically creating 2 Runic Boulders or 2 barriers for them to go through, and does no damage to you and is not going to eat up any more energy. So
and deal damage to them and knock them back.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's a lot going for it.
Can you actually toss the spikes? I don't think you can, right?
No, you can't. You can't do anything other than, you know, you pop them up.
But it's still, I mean, it's super useful to be able to do that, you know. Just don't use it against the troll. I tried, and it did not work out. The troll walks over it like it's, you know, nothing.
Yeah, I mean, he does that to the boulders as well. That's one of the more painful things, which we'll probably talk about later, is trying to face off with the troll with Pyromancy. It seems like, and with Geomancy, it seems like there's a lot going against Geomancy in those respects.
There are certainly limitations, most definitely. I think we can all agree with that. Anyone who's tried Geomancy against the troll. But the troll, of course, is like, you know, a special case. Most of the time, Geomancy, in particular Stone Spikes, is going to be very worth the point and worth your time using.
It's also notable, too, that when you use the Runic Boulder, you typically lose that line of sight, which is good against range enemies, but in this instance, having the Stone Spikes, I can still see over them and see what the enemy's doing and target them with my spells.
For even more boulder action.
Yeah.
Alright, let's go on to the next ability. This one is called Rune of Absorption. It directly modifies Stone Spike's passive. Replenishes 4% maximum energy for each enemy hit with Stone Spikes. Passive bonus, plus 2.5% geomantic power, and plus 10% move resistance. How do you feel about this one?
I mean, any skill that will give you energy back, especially since the stone spikes take up so much, I definitely like that. And then the move resistance is also nice as well. I'd say it's definitely one to consider, especially if you're going to be using stone spikes a lot. Yeah, that's pretty much my opinion on it. I think it's pretty decent within the skill tree.
Yeah, I would if I were putting numbers to it, I'd rate it a 3 out of 5 because it's good enough to want to use, but it's not great enough that I'm wanting to use it over every other thing, right? As mentioned before, Stone Spikes has a very high energy cost. Getting any kind of energy back is going to be good. If we're counting off of a base of 100, this basically gives us 4 energy back per guy hit. So the more base energy you have, the better this is going to be, either from equipment or investing in vitality. I know a lot of people don't invest in vitality necessarily just because, you could be putting it in other things. So, I mean, that's kind of relative, but it's still pretty easy to get energy bonuses, on your gear through enchantments and things like that. So this does get better with more energy that you have, and it gets better for the more enemies you face off against. So moderate against single target, much better against multi-target. I do like the passive bonus of the move resistance, just so that we're not impaled or anything like that. Is it impale? Yeah, it's immobilization, isn't it? Or is that control? No. It's control is dazed stun, right? So move is immobilization and confusion. So, immobilization is more like, protection against, or move resistance would be protection against like range stuff. So I do like the passive bonuses on this a little bit more. That being said, you can easily pass by this passive, I feel. That's my opinion. If you intend to use other abilities more.
Yeah, and it's not a keystone one either. You can definitely pass it. It's not connected to anything else. It's just kind of a nice to have to add on to your stone spikes.
Yeah, stone spikes in particular. If you want to use stone spikes a ton, you would go with this. But when you move on to, like, say, Boulder or Earthquake, it might be better to use that stuff. So I would hold off on this until I'm, like, getting to the point where I'm about to clear out the tree, and then pick it as one of the last ones, just so that I can have it and get that extra geomantic power on top of it.
Yeah, because I mean, realistically, when we're going through this and we're analyzing it, especially with a lot of those melee builds, there are only like 8 skills or 10 skills. Unless you're really going to get high level, you kind of want to scope out and kind of keep in mind that most people are probably going to get to level 10. Maybe they'll go to level 15, though it's going to require a lot of grinding. So you really need to be careful with how you spend your skill points. And you almost want to just hold on to your skill point until you can get the next skill after stone spikes.
Yeah, I could agree with that. Let's move on to our next ability, which is another rune that will modify other abilities, primarily stone spikes, but it also modifies stone armor. It is the Rune of Fortifying, which was mentioned earlier. Passive improves max durability of runic boulders and stone spikes by 50%. There is a caveat there, bugged. Do you know what that's about?
I wasn't able to find any information on the Wikipedia. I just saw that they had marked it as being bugged. I'm not sure what the exact bug is that it is. Someone in the comments might be able to enlighten us on that.
That's unfortunate that we don't know that, but it is what it is. There's lots of bugs in the game. It's just kind of something we have to deal with.
I almost imagine since it's marked as bugged, it's probably not doing what it's supposed to do. Like, it's probably not actually increasing the durability of the spikes or the boulders, or maybe just one or the other.
I wish I knew which one it was, because if it was runic boulders, that affects runic boulders a lot. Whereas the stone spikes, not so much, because you're at least getting 2, sets of stone spikes.
Yeah.
But It also increases the base duration of stone armor to 5 turns. That is not up 5 turns, it's to 5 turns. So it becomes 3 to 5, not 3 to 8. It also increases Stone Spike's base crushing damage by 60%. And passive bonus 2.5% geomantic power, 10% control resistance. What do you think of this one, Beardo?
Again, along with the other passive, I think you really just want to get this one if you're wanting to stop at stone spikes and not continue on down the tree, because the main bonus of that is to that. And again, like you said, make sure you're paying attention to the wording on a lot of these skills, because my initial thinking was, if I get this one, that means that my stone armor is now 8 turns long, when really it's just adding 1 turn or 2 turns. So but again, it goes along with the other one in that you get 10% control resistance. So when you're playing Magic, it's always nice to, or any build where you're not getting heavy armor or resistances, to have that bonus resistance built into your character.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I actually rated this ability much higher in the past. I still rate it higher than I would the other one. The other one I gave a 3. I would give this one a 4. Because it affects 4 different abilities. It affects the Runic Boulders, the Stone Spikes. Actually, I take it back, 3. It affects Stone Spikes twice. It increases the max durability by 50%, and it increases the base damage by 60%. And then, of course, the Stone Armor and the Runic Boulders. I rated it higher just because I was using Stone Armor so much. And I didn't like having to refresh it every 3 turns. Being able to refresh it every 5 turns actually made a difference to me. You know, when I was doing prolonged combat. So I wanted to be able to have its duration up higher, but that was me. And then, of course, the control resistance, as we mentioned, is nice. If you're not using all of these abilities, though, this rune becomes a lot less useful. You know, in particular, if you're not actually using your stone spikes. If you're not using your stone spikes, you don't want to get this. If you are going to be using stone spikes, definitely get this. And stone armor, obviously. Now, I don't know about the bug. You know, that could change some things. It might make, you know, its usefulness towards Runic Boulders a lot less, or the spikes kind of less. But, you know, it is what it is. But just be aware of that. It's always good to be educated about that sort of thing. But agreed, if you don't intend to use stone spikes, don't mess with it. Let's go on to our next ability. This one is called Earthquake. It's not a keystone ability, you know, at the very end of a tree, but it's still probably considered keystone in that it's very symbolic, I guess, or maybe used a lot, I would guess, you know, by people who play Geomancy. I could be wrong about that, but it has a reminiscent ability in Pyro, which would be, I think, what's Inferno or Magma Rain. I think Magma Rain.
Yeah, probably Magma Rain.
Yeah, it's a huge, wide area of effect spell. So, like the big spell, you could say that this is it. Earthquake active, type, target object, 5x5 area, very big. Range of vision, energy 35, cooldown 8. So actually relatively good cooldowns. Again, high energy. Probably should be using it after using a boulder. Modified by magic power and geomantic power, destroys a targeted runic boulder, creating an earthquake over a large area for 8 turns. Each turn of staying in the earthquake's area of effect will deal 3 times MP plus GP crushing damage, burns 3 times MP plus GP percent max energy, and has a 10 times MP plus GP percent chance to daze for 3 turns. Each turn will apply minus 5% control resistance and minus 10% move resistance, and the effect stacks and lasts until the earthquake's end. Passive bonus of 2.5% geo power. What do you think, Beardo?
This was, when I faced off against the troll, this was the one Geomancy skill that I was using just because of the chance to daze. I found it very effective in doing that against the troll, just because it sits there and it just constantly attacking. And for 8 turns, I mean, that's pretty crazy. And on top of that, I mean, it's a great move if you know that enemies are coming. You can basically just have them run through it, much like how you would do so with the different burning abilities in Pyro. You can just kind of force them to, you know, take damage. They're gonna have to walk through it one way or the other. And combining it with stone spikes, I mean, you can get a lot of different interesting combinations to really force them to stay in the earthquake. Yeah, I highly rate this one. I really like it. I would say that some of the other Geo spells later on are much more powerful, but this one's really good for crowd control.
It does definitely seem to have a varied mix of things that it does. You know, it deals damage, it burns energy, it crowd controls. You know, the fact that it also debuffs, so it, you know, has 4 things just associated from all the various things that it does. Very long duration, very short cooldown. The only negative thing about it maybe is the low % of damage it does and the high energy costs that I've seen. But other than that, I mean, it seems to be a really great ability, in particular, of course, because it's a 5x5 area effect and it can hit a lot of different things. And we were talking before about, you know, Runic Boulder's ability and Stone Spike's ability to set up walls. I mean, in its own way, Earthquake is a wall. You know, it's a wall of damage as compared to a wall of, you know, protection. So being able to basically just control the environment as you want and will makes it powerful. Definitely a very interesting ability. I haven't used it a ton, but definitely good.
It's a very situational ability. It's not one where if you're facing one-on-one that you're going to use it a lot. And the one issue you always have to be careful too is if you pop it off and then you're wanting to run through that area, you're not really going to be able to do that. So,
So
yeah,
it will affect you.
Yeah, if you walk into it and there's no baptism of fire equivalent for Geo, that if you walk into that earthquake that you'll get some kind of bonus for it, you're just going to get the damage and you can get dazed as well. So, yeah, it's something to keep in mind when you're going to use it. It's really just really good for crowd control in big open spaces. Although I have used it in situations where I'm facing off against a boss. I block them off with stone spikes, I pop off earthquake, and then I use what other spells are at my ability, or are at my disposal, I mean. So, it's an interesting one for sure.
You know, I'm actually surprised that you said you had some good results against the troll. Because I've heard a lot of people say that this ability was just useless against the troll. So the fact it was actually able to daze, did you ever actually get the troll to also stun from the double daze?
No, he never stunned, but well, I'll take that back. I actually do believe, I have to go back and watch the video, and you guys can definitely check that out if you're interested to see a Geo type build take on the trolls on my channel. I do believe I stunned him a number of times. This was after the number of patches that were done to up his stun resistance. So, I don't know. I'm surprised that people see it negatively against the troll. I really saw it as the only skill that was useful against the troll, because unlike many of the other Geo skills where it's one and done, other than I guess you can consider stone spikes, although the spikes just sit there, this one will actually continuously hit them. So I was setting up the boulder while I was fighting him, and I was doing the earthquake just outside the range of hitting me. So then he's got 4 tiles, or however, I think he takes up 4 tiles. However many tiles he takes up, that's how many times that I believe he's getting hit by the earthquake. So
that would be really interesting then, because, you know, alone the max energy burn and the debuffs would be worth the hit on him. But if he's actually getting hit by 4 instances of it, I mean, he'd be getting hit with 20% control resist negative and 40% move resist negative. I mean, that would be really big.
Yeah, I want to say at least 2 or 3 times during the fight he got full-on stun. The majority of the time, though, he was getting dazed. It wasn't like he only got dazed a couple times. And that's why, because I tried a number of strategies using Geomancy. Early on, I tried just kiting him and throwing boulders. That didn't do anything, really. And then I kind of went back. I was doing Greatsword with the build, so I went back. I made sure I'd parry. I got defensive stance to kind of help with that energy drain. And yeah, that seemed to be... Even though in that fight, I think I killed him with like 2 HP left. That was like the most effective for using Geo. Although it wasn't a full Geo build, keep that in mind. But yeah, I'm surprised because I really think it's probably one of the only skills that really is good to use against the troll, just because, like I said, it's not a one and done. It's sitting there for 8 turns slapping him, so...
Well, that being the case, definitely get down in those comments, guys, and let us know your experiences on Earthquake against the troll, and in general, since we have some conflicting views about it. It seems like I like the ability, but I'm just surprised it works so well against the troll. Let's go ahead and move on to our next ability, which affects Earthquake, Rune of Destabilization. Passive, prolonged space duration of Earthquake by 2 turns. That makes it 10. All enemies within the area of Earthquake receive plus 10% damage taken and plus 10% fumble chance. It gives a passive bonus of 2.5 geomantic power and 3% crit. What do you think of this one?
This one's pretty good. I mean, I definitely like that it increases the Earthquake from 8 to 10 turns. And then the fumble chance and the damage taken, 10% damage taken, especially against a big boss, is a big deal. And that's probably one of the reasons why I did well against the troll using Earthquake. Yeah, I mean, I think compared to the ones with the stone spikes, I definitely like this one. And any passive that gives crit chance is always a big yes from me.
I would agree. I love getting passive crit chance bonuses. So the passive bonus is definitely nice. As far as the passive itself, the Rune of Destabilization, it pretty much almost redefines Earthquake in its total ability to do things. You know, the fact that you're now getting bonuses to damage and bonuses to fumble, you're really messing your opponents up with this one. And given the naturally high area of effect and making it last even longer, you slam down the Earthquake, and then you just start plugging up their routes trying to get to you with, you know, more boulders and more stone spikes, and they're in for a bad time, you know. So definitely a huge buff to Earthquake. So if you like Earthquake, definitely pick up this rune. If you don't use Earthquake a lot, maybe pass it up. But...
yeah, and you have to get Earthquake either. Well, I mean, you got to get most of the main skills anyways. But yeah, again, if your strategy isn't going to include Earthquake in it, especially if you're trying to get to the end of the skill tree, I'd say hold off on using the point. But yeah, it definitely helped me with my Geo build.
And this is kind of harkening back to what we said earlier about how synergistic the schools of magic are, in that, you know, they do really rely upon the rest of or they rely on other talents to make their basic abilities better, or sometimes even good enough to use. So definitely keep that in mind whenever you go into any kind of school of magic. You know, you're gonna feel that temptation to start dropping all the points into it, and at that point you're just a Geo build. You know, so if you attempt to splash. So, like I said, if you're using something else, maybe pass it up. Other than that, it seems good. Seems good if you want to use Earthquake. Let's go ahead and move on to our next one. This one is called Runic Explosion. It is an active. Target object, 5x5 area, range of vision, energy 50. Wow. Cooldown 16. Modified by MP and GP. Destroys a targeted Runic Boulder, provoking a violent explosion. Deals 15 base times MP and GP, arcane damage, and 5 base MP plus GP crushing damage to all targets in the area of effect. Has 50 times MP plus GP % chance to knockback, and 50 times MP plus GP chance to stun. Replenishes 5% of max energy for each enemy killed. What do you think about this one?
So this was, when I did my Geo build, this was actually one of the few that, or one of the only ones that I didn't actually get. I opted to get Boulder Toss instead of this one. But despite the high energy cost, this is extremely powerful. And the fact that it does give energy back, it has the stun chance, it has the knockback chance. It's got all of the good stuff that we've seen from the earlier skills. It's all just compacted into one single magical ability. I would say this is definitely top tier, probably highest rated of the Geo skills, although it is hard to compare to the fun of Boulder Toss, which we'll go over soon.
I kind of feel like this is what a lot of people want an Earthquake to kind of be like, because it's that 5x5 area, except it's just a violent explosion of damage. So the fact that you get both is nice. And it has a chance to knock back, and it has a chance to stun. Those are two great ability chances tacked onto a damaging ability. It deals 2 types of damage, Arcane and Crushing, both are which are really good. You know, there's not a ton of resistances against those particular ones, to my knowledge. And, of course, everyone knows Crushing does better against, skeletons, the undead in general. And it has a magic replenishment on it for each enemy killed. You know, how great is that? The only negatives here are the moderate cooldown of 16 and the extremely high energy of 50. And this actually changes, in my opinion, even more of a previous ability that we had seen. I think it was the Rune of Binding. Let me go back right quick. Rune of Binding, which raising a Runic Boulder makes the next ability minus 25% ability's energy cost for the turn. I'm going to bump that up to a necessary passive, which makes Rune of Enfeeblement also necessary, because some of this later game energy cost stuff is out of control for Geomancy. And you need to have that. I'm going to say that now. You need to have that passive in order to make some of this later stuff work. Otherwise, you are going to be running out of energy big time. So.
Yeah, I think, like you said, if you're just trying to dip your toes into Geomancy, you can typically skip those. But if you want to go full on Geo, those early passives are absolutely necessary. Because that's the issue that I ran into, is I didn't get those early passives, and I could definitely tell the huge energy costs that a lot of these spells take.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, this one's big. I know Boulder Toss is pretty big. I just looked at Boulder Toss. It's, very comparative, too. So, definitely huge mana cost here. So it's a really good thing that you've got Runic Empowerment. That being said, I still wouldn't recommend slapping up 3 Runic Boulders just to be able to cast some of this stuff, because it's going to be draining energy too. I still feel like having the Runic Boulder be up for a short amount of time as possible is the best thing to do. And make use of the boulder as soon as possible, either by shredding it with stone spikes, or exploding it with Runic Explosion, or creating earthquakes, whatever you do. Because it's all about energy management for Geomancy. Definitely you want a lot of energy needs. I'm going to say that now. At least this one replenishes magic energy for enemies killed, and it looks like it does a lot of damage to do that sort of thing. So, seems like a great ability. I have not personally used this a ton, so I wouldn't know. I have also been the Boulder Toss type dude. So,
yeah, this is my first time using it. It is extremely strong, and the bonus being that Boulder Toss only targets one enemy, while this can get, that entire 5x5 area. So,
yeah, if you want to lay down complete destruction on like a cluster of enemies, whether it be, the human guys outside of the castle, you know, or maybe even just like a pack of unlucky Saiga, you know. This is the ability for you.
That I hadn't thought of that. Using this for Saiga hunting would be hilarious.
Just the fact that the range of vision is so big makes hunting with earth magic very, very tempting and useful, I feel. And I love massacring Saiga as a pastime. So
Yeah,
maybe it's just me. But definitely a very strong ability. I'm saying that now. Moving on to its relevant next ability, Rune of Cycle. Runic Explosion reduces active cooldowns for this ability tree by 20% for each enemy hit. Passive bonus 2.5 Geomancy power and plus 5% magic power. What do you think of this one?
I mean, this one's pretty ridiculous. The active cooldowns for all skills being reduced by that much, and then the additional passive of getting magic power. Yeah, and the more we're looking at it, it's almost like you want to get those beginning passives. You can kind of skip the middle ones, but these end ones seem essential if you're gonna be going full Geo.
Well, once again, it depends on how much you use the ability. This one, obviously, for Runic Explosion, benefits Runic Explosion, which of Runic Explosion thus benefits every other ability once you use it. If you can hit 5 guys, basically what this means is it refreshes all your cooldowns, and that's pretty neat. How often you'll be able to hit 5 guys, who can say, but I definitely have been in lots of situations where I've been able to hit 3 or 4. Wouldn't you say that?
Oh, definitely, especially if you're getting ambushed, or
Honestly,
even the end bandit dungeon in Manshire. I've definitely been cornered by more than 2 guys in that area just from making bad decisions.
Agreed. And then, like, sometimes when you just hit the 3 or 4 and get that 60-80%, that's all that you're going to need because it's already been ticking down. So, I mean, this will pretty much refresh it. And then it has the nice, they did a nice thing for the passive where they increased magic power and geomancy power. So that's the equivalent of 5 points in, no, is it 5 or 2.5? I can't remember. Points into your primary stat of willpower. So a nice little damage increase to boot it off. If you're going to use Runic Explosion, this is a nice passive to have.
Definitely.
So we'll go ahead and skip on to the next one, which is Boulder Toss. Type target object to target tile. You've probably have definitely seen Beardo play around with this ability if you've been paying attention to the video. Range of 6+ bonus range. So this one actually does benefit from bonus range. Although I figured the others would, but I guess they're all vision, huh? Energy of 40, cooldown of 8, so a very low cooldown, very high energy cost, modified by MP and GP. Rips a targeted boulder from the ground and tosses it towards a targeted tile. Just to clarify, I do believe this refers specifically to Runic Boulder. I don't think if you were to see random boulders lying out in the wild or in town, it can target those. I don't think that happens, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not stated, but we can assume that it's Runic boulders.
The toss deals 18 base times MP times GP, so that's a very, very nice base damage, very good damage calculator on that. Crushing damage and 2 times MP times GP arcane damage. When it hits, the boulder has 75 times MP times GP percent chance to knock the target back, and a 20 times MP times GP chance to apply stun or daze. Each traveled tile will increase damage by 12% and also increase the duration of stun or daze. So that is extremely good. I've seen Beardo tossing around some boulders that were like easily the span of 12 tiles, just because what you want to do is you cast it on one end of the screen and then you send it straight into your opponent on the other side of the screen. You don't want to do it close range.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah,
you get massive damage bonuses doing that, and of course it has the standard plus 2.5% Geomancy power. What do you feel about this one, Beardo?
This is probably my favorite skill in the tree, just because of what you do. Just laying the boulder down, tossing it. Yeah, and I don't have too much to say other than I just really like the skill. It's extremely powerful, especially if you get a crit on it. You probably saw some of my crits equaling up to like 200, 250 damage. The main criticism, well, I guess not criticism, but the main thing to keep in mind, which kind of sucks about it, is that the range isn't too terribly good, but also that if you're tossing it in a dungeon, you definitely have the chance of missing. I've had that happen. You guys probably saw it during the playthrough where I was tossing the boulder and it hit the door or it hit anything other than the enemy I was aiming at. So,
oh, no. So yeah, it does arrow mechanics?
Yeah, it's basically doing the same as arrow mechanics, and I'm curious if it draws from accuracy when you throw it. It seems kind of weird that your like personal accuracy would play into you throwing a boulder using magic, but it's entirely possible.
So you've missed with it?
Yeah, yeah, especially in the dungeons I've missed. It's kind of been painful.
Interesting. I didn't know it could actually do that, the whole arrow mechanic thing, but I would definitely, even despite all that, I would say that this is a B&B skill of the Geomancy tree. It's a bread and butter skill. And one of the reasons I like to say that is because, if you've played Stoneshard as long as we have, you will quickly come to realize most of your fights are going to be one-on-ones, Obviously, you're going to run in the packs of wolves and stuff like that. But, if you're playing smart, and you should, definitely in the early parts of the game, you should be, unless you're powerful enough to just thresh through a bunch of wolves, you should be, like, pulling them one by one. Same for bandits, fight them one-on-one. And that's what Boulder Toss does, it basically is a 2-cast, and then you crush it, And, you keep doing that, and then you basically wipe out the pack by doing it 3 times. The temptation to use massive area of effect magic is always going to be there, but being able to reliably mow down an enemy, in my opinion, is much more stronger and much more reliable. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and it's really I'd say the only skill other than petrification that will only target one enemy. Most everything else you're using is just bowing out from the Runic Boulder. So I agree. I think this is why I favored this one over Arcane Explosion, or the Explosion one. I think what was it called? Was it Arcane Explosion? Runic Explosion. That's what it was. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the main reason why I ended up going with it. Plus, I mean, it's pretty fun just to be tossing boulders at people. It's probably, especially the more you play the game, especially if you're playing a lot of melee, you'll notice a lot of the mechanics and stuff all seem very similar and the same. But when you're able to throw the boulder like that, it gives you a sense of something entirely different from what the game has been providing you so far to do.
If you're paying attention to him actually playing, that right there was an instance where Runic Explosion would have been one of the times I would have said would have been ideal, because they were all clustered together. It was going to be hard to try and separate them. But most of the time when he's been playing, it's been he takes down one guy at a time. So that's probably why I'm going to favor Boulder Toss in general to other things. And obviously it gets better if you say pop 5 points and get Perception 15, because then you're making it a range of 7 at that point. It's easy to think that, with all the other spells being a vision range, you would base it upon that. But you do have to keep in mind that Boulder Toss does work on range plus bonus range. So having extra range does benefit as well. It just has such a high base damage. And the fact that it basically gets, heroic charge, the tile traveled bonus, makes it even better. And the fact that it stuns in days, and I'm a sucker for stun in days, really great ability. 5 out of 5 for me. I feel like this is probably the ability to get.
Yeah, I'd say this is what you're basically aiming for if you're playing Geo.
Let's go ahead and look at our next ability, which modifies Boulder Toss. Well, maybe not. I thought it did, but I guess it doesn't. Rune of Sustention. Passive, killing enemies replenishes 50% of all your runic boulders and stone spikes durability, and grants 50% cooldown duration for 2 turns. Passive bonus, 2.5% geomantic power and minus 3% fumble chance. You don't typically have a high fumble chance when you play casters, do you?
I think it depends. I did notice, because I'm running a Pyromancy build right now, that you can fumble your spells and you can miss. But I would say it's on the lower end compared to weapon skills.
So, I mean, this just kind of, like, helps eliminate that fumble, because no one likes fumbling spells. You want it to do what it says it's going to do. It's a little easier to kind of bite down the fact that if you do a melee attack, you fumble it. Particularly if you're wielding, like, flails. That's a whole mess on its own. But, killing enemies replenishes 50% of your runic boulders and stone spikes durability and grants CD for 2 turns. What do you feel about this one, Beardo?
A little bit conflicted, because I feel like there's good things and there's bad things in here. So the cooldown duration, I mean, that's pretty nuts. Getting minus 50% for 2 turns is pretty much you're basically gonna get your skills back. At the same time, having the additional durability to your stone spikes and your runic boulder, I don't see much of a need for that, especially if the enemies are dead. Maybe it'll be more useful later in the game, once things are more built out and you are gonna be maybe you're just taking on tons and tons of enemies. But it just feels like kind of overkill, and I don't know that I would want to use my skill point here. I would probably go for one of the other passives on the right side towards the end.
Yeah, I agree. I don't. We're talking about talent points. What is a talent point worth? That's what it all comes down to. Even though this is at the very end of a tree, it just doesn't seem to do enough. That first part about the runic boulder and durability and all that may as well not even exist to me. I don't even care about that. Maybe I'll find myself in a situation, but by the time at the end of a tree, I would not care about that. I would basically be, crafting boulders and tossing them immediately, or exploding them, or earthquaking them, or something. I don't want that stuff to stay up. The only thing that would count would be the stone spikes, and I mean, those are typically durability good on their own. They have to actually hit them in order for me to care, and most of the time they'll walk around them. So what this really means is 50% CD for 2 turns if you kill an enemy. I mean, that's good, but it's not great.
Yeah.
It's good in that there's no stipulation. Just killing an enemy gives this to you, right? That's really good. But, like, we'll also have Runic Explosion, and I mean, if we're putting the talent point in the to basically get all of that cooldown back and resetting all of our abilities, and basically using Runic Explosion to do that, why do you need Rune of Sustention? It's like you only go one of either way. Either you invest in Runic Explosion and its passive and rely on it for your CD needs, or you completely go around Runic Explosion, pick up Boulder Toss, and then get this to be your CD needs. So there's no reason, in my opinion, to go Runic Explosion and this, because it would be kind of helpful, but not super helpful. You would want to go one or the other. I don't know. It seems like it's a passive that's already doing something else is doing, and I'm not a fan.
Yeah, I mean that's what I was saying. I feel like it's overkill because if you're using Runic Explosion, I really don't see the need for getting this.
I feel like I should like this more, since it is a static, just killing enemies gives you 50% CD duration. But, I don't know.
Yeah, I think
I kind of feel like Runic Explosion should be where it's at.
Yeah, almost, right?
Yeah, since it seems to be a much more powerful active ability. But maybe that's just my own sentimentality or something. I don't know.
Well, I mean, especially
I
since
should like it more.
Since they already have all the skills going down one after the other, you would think that you could like replace Boulder Toss with that one, or have Runic Explosion where that rune is, and then have Boulder Toss where Runic Explosion is. It just kind of seems like weird placement, and I honestly would probably skip over that one as well, because I think going through it and just kind of wrap up in general is like, I think we counted out probably only spending 9 to 10 points within Geomancy hard. Which is nice, because that means that by the time you get to level 10, as long as you're able to get that Geo number 4, which can be very elusive going through the dungeons, you're pretty much set with everything you need, and you can look at other skill trees if you want to get a little bit more combat or whatever you want to do, or maybe you want to get some pyro in there as well. I do think that it's kind of the nice thing just going through it.
I will say Geomancy is one of the easier schools of magic. In fact, it is the easiest school of magic to level up, because the Witch's Hut always drops Geo 3. Period. It will always have it. So you're only looking, if you start with a character capable of Geomancy, you're only looking for Geo 2 and Geo 4. So that's something to be considering for our later evaluation.
Yeah, definitely.
But like with Boulder Toss being so good as it is, I think, is that locked behind 4 or 3?
It's 4. Those bottom 4, those are, yeah, they're locked behind Treaties 4.
So it can be a little hard to get the super good abilities to begin with, but it is what it is. Yeah, I mean, I would put the point in Rune of Sustention to basically fill out Geomancy, because like I said, I like picking up whatever bonuses the GP I can get, and if you're playing Jonah, that would also be another 2 points in MP, but I don't know. 3 out of 5. It's decent, but it's not great.
Yeah, no, I agree. One thing I did want to add, and this is kind of just outside the game and stuff, one thing for people to keep in mind if you want to go Geo, it is rather resource intensive, and I hope in the recording it didn't translate that much, but I definitely noticed animations and stuff going slower when I'm activating Earthquake, when I'm doing Runic Explosion, when I'm doing a bunch of these really heavy skills, because of all of the things that are being created and done in the game. If you have a slower computer, you're probably going to have a harder time running Geomancy without the game going much slower. Just as a side thing outside of, how awesome the skill tree is in general.
So don't run it on a potato.
Basically, because I have seen in Discord that people complain about how slow the game is on their machine, and it might not even just be that they're running a potato. They just don't, like, maybe they're just playing on a laptop. They don't have a full-on gaming PC, or like one of those hardcore gaming laptops.
Well, even modern regular PCs, I've seen the specs on them, and I mean, they have pretty good specs. 4 gigs of RAM. Often. SSD, internal SSD. So, modern, like really modern laptops, like, within the last year, you shouldn't have a problem. But if it's like 4 years or something, maybe even more than that, I think that's when you're running into issues. Definitely not 8 years and more.
Well, yeah, and just in general, it's much more resource intensive than any melee you're going to go. And even when we go over Pyro, the majority of those skills they don't use as many blocks or as much animations as Geo does. It's very resource intensive.
So that's a good point. Definitely something to keep an eye out for. We'll go over Pyromancy next, but as a quick mention about gear options for Geomancy, what it really comes down to, in my opinion at least, is that if you're going to be playing any kind of Geomancy, unless you're actually attempting to dip into skills or you're trying to do a half and half build, you're going to want to use the Geomancy set, or you're going to want to use the Exquisite set. Geomancy set will give you additional geomantic power, and it's a little more defensively focused, just as Geomancy is. I believe you get some fortitude off of it, and a couple of other. I think you get crushing resistance too. Like, you know, you get some interesting defenses on it. But the primary reason you want to use it is for the geomantic power bonus, so that your spells will hit even harder. And of course, whenever you play any kind of school of magic, you want your spells to hit hard. You know, you want it to perform as best as it can. And as you've seen in the calculations we've been going over, Geomancy does play a pretty big part for the damage calculation, as does MP. So definitely keep that in mind. If you use the Exquisite set, you will be getting some magic power out of it, but it'll be a little bit more energy efficient. I believe it has skills reduction and things along that line. So let me go ahead and see if I can bring that up right quick.
Yeah, I mean, and the recent equipment update did make a lot of the magic equipment more available, whether that's staves or the cowl and the robe. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Usually you want, like Darley said, you want to be using the equipment suited to your skills just because of the bonuses. But like looking at the chrono, I keep looking at the Chronomancer gear. The cooldown duration, the minus to the cooldown duration is ridiculous. So it might actually outweigh your desire to get those extra geomantic points. So definitely something to keep in mind when you're doing the build. And that's assuming that you're going to be using all geomancy equipment, because you might end up just having geomancy as like a side thing. So you might have legit armor and legit weapons, instead of having a full geomancy set like my character does right now.
So I just looked it up, and I was referring to the Exquisite Mantle. The Exquisite Mantle, aside from some physical resistant, magic resistance, and frost and bleed, gives minus 5% spells energy cost, minus 5% cooldown duration, and 20% magic power, compared to the Geomancy Mantle, which gives 30% geomantic power and minus 10% spell energy cost. So it definitely has a greater spell energy cost, but Exquisite does 5% CD cooldown duration. I think I would just go ahead and recommend Geomancer Mantle in this respect, simply because the problems that Geomancer has is more spell energy costs, and it gives better of that than the Exquisite Mantle, and an additional 10% geomantic power over the magic power that the Exquisite Mantle provides. And it has resistances that are more in line with Geomancy. So straight damage taken minus 5%, move resistance plus 10, that sort of thing. Definitely going to say stick to Geomancer if you go Geomancy as a main school. That's my opinion.
Yeah, same here.
And your choice of staff, you know. Typically it's going to be Geomancy, or you can use anything that in tunes with you. Like Beardo said, you know, you might want to try out the Chrono staff for even more cooldown duration. But with us talking about Rune of Sustention or what's the other one? Rune of Cycle, you might not even need that. But it's up to you, you know. Try it out, let us know in the comments, you know, what do you like, you know, which is better. All right, starting our next segment, focusing on Pyromancy. The School of Fire, definitely a standard in any kind of fantasy element you might feel. or talk about or think about. Throwing fireballs has always been a catch-all spell for wizardry and that sort of thing. So I think when anybody thinks about playing any kind of magic caster, you think about chucking fire. And that's exactly what this first ability does. Fire Barrage active. Type target tile. That's very important. Range 5+ bonus range. Energy 15, cooldown 4. Modified by magic power and pyromantic power. Launches a flurry of 3 firebolts at the target, each dealing 6 base times MP times PP. So pyromantic power. Fire damage. Each firebolt deals 50% damage to burning targets. Passive bonus plus 2.5% pyromantic power. How do you feel about this one, Beardo?
Yeah, I mean it's pretty good starting off skill. I mean it definitely feeds in well to early pyro because you're gonna be doing a lot of this where you're just gonna be kiting enemies, and there's the added thing where you can actually, rather than just straight up target the enemy, if you target the tile where they're gonna step, you can light them on fire, and that feeds into a lot of other abilities on top of the burning debuff that you can see on our info slides here.
My opinion on this build is it is a 5 out of 5 ability. It just does a lot. It's so basically good. It's amazing in that respect. You know, extremely short cooldown. You know, cooldown of 4. So you're getting it constantly and you're using it constantly. Energy of 15, very respectable energy use, not compared to like the 40 and 50s we were seeing in, you know, over in Geomancy. So, you know, you'll be using this ability not just because of its cooldown, but because of its energy efficiency. As mentioned earlier, and you said it as well, target a tile. You know, you can hit the ground and burn people coming to you ahead of you so that they get lit on fire. And if you know anything about the Pyromancy tree, setting your opponent on fire ahead of time does proc additional abilities sometimes, or it can be important to certain abilities. Certainly Fire Barrage itself gains a benefit from the enemies being burning, so it deals more damage, which is great because, you know, it gets a self buff. You know, if any one of these firebolts hit with its fire damage, which can proc burning, it will deal more damage. So it has chances basically to buff itself. It's just extremely good in that respect. And the range of a base 5 with bonus range means that, you know, you have the ability to hit at a long range, even greater than, you know, on rush, you know, from a very, very early point in the game. It's long enough that you can actually use it to hunt. It's just all around great. You know, I would even put it maybe even higher than 5. You know, Fire Barrage, really great spell.
Yeah, I mean, and it like you said, it makes it so much easier to hunt compared to using the bow and arrow. I mean, you're pretty much guaranteed to hit, especially the stuff that'll just see you right away once your range gets far enough. I mean, it's going down.
Yeah, it hits 3 times. You know, and I think at the early parts of the game, you're doing 9 to what, like 9 to 11, or maybe even 12. So I mean, you're doing roughly 30 damage per shot of Fire Barrage. That's great, especially against most animals. You know, you're definitely going to kill rabbits. You're definitely going to kill boars. You know, you only have to basically shoot it off twice, unless I think you get them to be burning or something, against deer. So, you know, it's very, very easy to get that early food, get that a little bit of early extra income, you know, and it's usable, you know, very, very often, you know. So great ability in my opinion. Really helps make the tree, and you'll see why later. Let's move on to our next ability, Feed the Flames. It is a passive. When a bolt from Fire Barrage connects with a burning enemy, the duration of burning is prolonged by 1 turn. Passive bonus, 2.5% pyromantic power, and plus 3% accuracy. How do you feel about this, Beardo?
This is one of those ones that I wasn't too sure how useful it really is. It's very situational, and in my pyro build, I actually didn't get this one. I just held off, and I don't know how useful the accuracy is for a mage, because it seemed to me that my accuracy was much higher than any of the melee builds that I've done so far.
I would agree. I'm not too positive about the effects of accuracy when it comes to spells. It seems like spells typically only work off the fumble mechanic, and that's when it can actually mess up the spell. So I'm not positive accuracy is all that great to have on this. That being said, what it really comes down to is addressing the burning mechanic. Now, burning can proc anytime fire damage happens. So that's why when setting it on, setting stuff on fire, the ground is burning, and that's a little bit of a different instance. But when an enemy is burning ahead of time, Fire Barrage will deal extra damage, and that's when any bolt connects with the burning enemy, I believe. So since it hits 3 times, it can actually extend the burning by 3 turns. I believe that is the case. So we need to address the effects of burning. Burning, as noted on this little sidebar, increases spells or skills energy cost by 100%, increases their fumble chance by 35, increases their cooldown duration by 100%, increases their spells energy cost by 100%, and it deals fire damage 3.5% of max HP. That is an immensely good debuff to have on an enemy. I didn't read off a single thing I thought was inappropriate or ineffective at messing up the enemy. Yes, they can still act. Yes, they can still move towards you, but they're going to have a bad time doing so. What's really interesting about the burning mechanic is the effects that it has against very high HP enemies, which we will also discuss later, particularly about its effect against the troll. But Fire Barrage, by extending burning on high HP value targets, is definitely better, and that is what Feed the Flames does. It makes it so that your Fire Barrage has the ability to get extremely high durations against those targets. It may necessitate that you set them on fire some other way and not use Fire Barrage for that. So it's kind of feeds into a spell combo. You use other spells that are maybe longer range or fire capable to set them on fire first, and then you use the bolt to keep that burn duration going. So I think this is actually quite a good passive. Not a fan of the passive accuracy, but still good nonetheless. I put it like at a 4.
Yeah, and kind of like what you said, it almost seems like this is one that you would pass up at the beginning, because I really can't see you using Fire Barrage, getting someone on fire, and them still being on fire by the time the cooldown's over. But I could see the merit in having it once you start getting like Blaze and stuff, and you're able, or Ring of Fire, and you're able to get the enemy on fire by other means.
I often find that I take this passive simply because I don't have anything else that I can put my points into. I haven't found Pyro 2 yet. I haven't found Pyro 3. I haven't found Pyro 4. But I've already gotten the next ability, which we'll talk about here in a moment, and I'm already level, 2 or 3. And I need to be able to put it into something. Well, if I put it into this, I get some Pyromancy power, and I know I'll need it eventually. So you can either come back to it or you can invest the point now. I think either is fine. But yes, I agree. It's not immediately useful all the time, but it can be.
Yeah, I mean, I would say too that there is, and that's just like a broader conversation too, but I think there is some merit to holding on to your skill points and not using them right away and kind of waiting until you get the skills that you want. But I can definitely see if you really want to use your skill point and you only have the treaties one that you would, or you haven't found any treaties yet, that you would go ahead and get this one.
Yeah, I agree too. But Like I said, it really just depends on what my end build is and what I intend to use. Obviously, I'm holding off skill points to get Boulder Toss. I don't know about some of the others. Going on to our next ability, we have Ring of Fire. I did not have a ton of respect for this ability when I first used it, but I'm going to go ahead and say I developed new respect for it after I actually played Pyromancy. It is an active target area circle, range 1, energy 20, cooldown 15, magic power and pyromantic power modify it. Ignites surrounding tiles, dealing 18 times MP times PP fire damage to enemies. Has a 50 times MP plus pyro percent chance to ignite all affected targets, and applies minus 20% times MP plus pyro percent fire resistance. Grants plus 20% pyromantic power for 4 turns for each enemy hit. Passive bonus 2.5% pyromantic power. How do you feel about this one, Beardo?
I mean, I feel like this one is definitely essential when you're starting off. It's really nice as it's kind of like an oh crap moment, like we've talked about before, where once the enemy gets up to you, especially when you're starting early Pyromancy, you're going to be doing a lot of kiting. So when the enemy does manage to get up to you, it is kind of nice to have that. Or once you have it, you can kind of hold off, and rather than constantly kiting, you know that you have this, and this will do X amount of damage and can kill the guy before you get the attack off. But the additional pyromantic power is definitely a nice buff on top of that.
I agree, but I actually think a little bit even more of this ability than what you say. To me, this ability was part of my spell combo in the early game. So we do agree it's more important than the early game. It did kind of fall off after I ended up achieving a higher ability, Melting Ray. And, a lot of our kills came from range. But I found even new respect for it against the Troll. One thing I'd like to make of note is that it has the same damage calculation for damage that Runic Explosion had. And that was a very high level ability at a base 18 damage times MP times Pyro. So it does a lot of damage and you get it very early in the tree. Basically, if you pound them with Fire Barrage and then finish them with Ring of Fire, you almost always can't go wrong on that. It has a very high chance to ignite, so when they are up on you, you can actually combo this with Ring of Fire into Fire Barrage to do a massive amount of damage to them. So that can end most normal enemies quickly. But when I went up against the Troll had a lot of fire resistance for a very special reason. That reason being, people were killing it at level 1, abusing Fire Barrage. So they needed some way to fight that. They ended up tacking on a ton of fire resistance. When I tried to fight the Troll, he had way too much fire resistance until I started using Ring of Fire. When I used Ring of Fire, I was able to get rid of all of his fire resistance and actually do some real damage to him. This ability is very necessary against fire-resistant foes, in particular the Troll. So
yeah, and that's kind of a common thing within the tree as well, and you probably even need this more so than in Geomancy, is the lowering of the fire resistance, because there's passives as well that will do this. So yeah, in anything that's going to lower their fire resistance, it just equates to you doing even more damage than you already are. So, and it'll just continue to stack. So that is a nice additional piece on top of, and then you also get the additional pyromantic power. So yeah, it's an interesting skill for sure. I rate it highly. It's saved my butt a number of times in my permadeath run with doing pyromancy.
Yeah, we should also bring up a special conditional about pyromancy at this point as well. May as well get it out of the way. Unlike Geomancy, pyromancy can suffer from the weather. If you've played pyromancy at all, you might notice that whenever it's raining, the enemy will get fire resistant, because they are basically wet. Ring of Fire also helps against that. you know. Obviously, it's not going to deal as much damage as well as some of the other abilities, but if you do find yourself out on the road and get ambushed in the middle of a rainstorm, it can be good to have Ring of Fire be used to hit down priority targets by not only pumping up your pyromantic power, which is another thing that is often overlooked, but also reducing their resistance, as Beardo said. So be careful if you ever play Pyromancer about going out into the rain. You will definitely notice a massive weakening to your ability to kill.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically 50%. So if you're early game and you're doing Fire Barrage for 10 damage for each hit, that's going to be 5 damage per hit. You're going to go from doing 30 damage to 15 damage, meaning you're going to have to do 2 spells to cover what you would normally do 1. So, yeah, it's a huge, big deal. In the future, I'm sure that there will be more weather types, so things will get balanced out more. I'm sure maybe like if you're frozen or something, or I don't know, there's probably going to be weather conditions that will be favorable, or maybe just in the heat or something, you'd have lower fire resistance, and that might even be the case for Geomancy too in the future. But for right now, the only weather effect we have is getting wet from the rain, so definitely keep that in mind anytime that you're going to go out. If you wake up from the tavern and you see that it's raining, just go right back inside and go back to sleep.
That's definitely one way to solve the problem.
Yeah.
But then you get my kind of luck, and it's raining for 5 days straight, and I'm like, okay, screw it. So I go out and do this anyway.
Yeah, it can
you'll
definitely
find
happen.
that fire... sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that can definitely happen too.
You'll find fire excels in dungeons for that very reason, that you'll never find weather there. It's only when you're overland that you may have to worry about it. But considering that fire does its main job as to basically chucking damage everywhere, I'm not surprised that it has that major setback. But it is what it is. You have to live with it. It's just something you deal with. But Ring of Fire is somewhat of an answer. Just be careful about getting them too close. That might be a problem. Moving on to our next ability, we have Blaze. It is an active type, target area, cone, or 3x3. Range of 3, energy of 20, cooldown of 8, modified by magic power and pyromantic power. Deals 15 times MP times PP fire damage to all targets in the area of effect. The affected targets have their energy burnt for double the received damage. Reduces cooldown duration for the tree by 1 for each enemy hit. Passive bonus 2.5 pyromantic power. How do you feel about this one?
And this is it just kind of gets better once you get Ring of Fire and you get Treaties 2 and you're able to get this one. It's nice to round out and have another range skill on top of Fire Barrage, so that the range is not as far. Being able to hit multiple enemies in one go differentiates it from Fire Barrage. Yeah, I mean, everything related to it, I definitely like this one. I would rate it highly.
So for me, Geomancy felt more like 1-2 combos, right? And it always stemmed off of Runic Boulder. You cast Runic Boulder, and then you cast another spell that used your Runic Boulder. For me, Pyromancy is more like a spell chain, right? So for me, it's you open up with a Fire Barrage, then you cast Blaze. So Fire Barrage at 4 paces away, Blaze at 3 paces away, Ring of Fire when they're 1 pace away, and then you follow that up with Fire Barrage again, because it's been 4 turns, typically around that time. So, that combination of 4 spells, all hitting them at once, they might get 1 attack against you. But typically they're dead after that. And you'll notice that a lot of spells, including Blaze has a very high base damage of 15. That's only a little bit behind Ring of Fire itself. So very, very high damages from fire spells, you will notice. Definitely part of the 1-2-3 combo that I was running. and definitely a great ability to have. I did not know we can do a 3x3. What is that about? Because I've only ever seen it in a cone.
Let me see if I can do it like that.
Oh, so a diagonal. That's what it meant. Okay.
Yeah. So it's kind of like when the troll, I forget what the move is, but the one where he lifts the ground up, basically. You can do like that.
A diagonal cone.
Yeah. So it's 3x3 technically, right? Because it's... Yeah, I think it's about the same amount. Maybe it's a little bit more.
The fact that this ability also burns energy is great, and it reduces cooldowns. I mean, it's the only weakness I could possibly think about it is its range of 3. And that's kind of what the spell is all about anyway, so I'm not going to hold it against it. But I think it's a great spell.
It's kind of along the same lines of Ring of Fire. It's when the enemy is getting too close for all your other ranged attacks, it's really good to pop off and use against them. Yeah. Because before they get to... You can burn most of their energy before they even get to you. And then they can just really only do basic attacks.
So close to mid-range is kind of how I think of it.
Yeah, whereas the majority of the spells in Pyro are longer range. You've got Ring of Fire, which is super close range, and then you got Blaze, which is mid-range, and then everything else is pretty much long range.
Agreed. Moving on to our next ability, we have Scorch. It is a passive. Targets affected by Blaze gain minus 15% fire resistance for 30 turns. Passive bonus, 2.5 pyromantic power and plus 3% crit chance. How do you feel about this one, Beardo?
I rate this one pretty highly, actually. While I would say Feed the Flames is one that you can skip for later, I highly recommend getting this one, especially once you have Blaze. Just because the fire resistance, knocking down their fire resistance just means you're going to be doing more damage. And on top of that, as we've said, as we've noted multiple times, any passive that gives crit chance gets high ratings, especially for me.
Mainly because spells can crit, right?
Yeah, contrary to some belief, I've seen people argue that they can't. Which is confusing to me because when you're playing, you can obviously see the crit number pop up. Yeah, you can definitely crit, and your crits are affected by crit chance, not by magic power or something. I think maybe that's more of the contention, that people think that your crit chance is more affected by your magic power, but is in fact and confirmed by the developers multiple times I've seen on the Discord. It is the critical chance for magic users is coming from crit chance. It's not coming from somewhere else.
Yeah. I mean, why would they even put it on the Pyromancy mantle if it wasn't, you know, a relevant ability? So I definitely feel crit is a good stat to get for fire, Pyromancy, and spells in general, to be honest. And having it so early is good. So the passive bonuses, as we agreed, are good. And since, you know, like I said, it's part of the 3-hit combo with Blaze, Ring of Fire, and Fire Barrage, buffing your primary combo is good. And, of course, fire resistance being good as is. You want to use it anyway. And it's very long, 30 turns, you know. Once it hits, you don't really have to worry about it. They're going to have that minus fire resistance. And that's just a straight buff to damage for you.
Yeah, there's no way they're gonna last 30 turns once you use this. So
yeah, I agree. Definitely a good passive to get. Definitely want to pick it up. It's not a waste of a point. Going on to our next ability, we have Baptism by Fire. Passive, taking fire damage, reduces cooldown duration for spells of the skill tree and reduces duration of current negative effects. The higher the damage, the more powerful the effect. Passive bonus, 2.5% pyromantic power and plus 20% fire resistance. What do you think, Beardo?
I mean, I'm somewhat conflicted on this one, especially being a newer player to doing Pyromancy. I can see the benefit of doing it, but I always find myself trying to avoid getting any kind of damage at all. So I could see a situation where you kind of set yourself up for failure. Maybe use Ring of Fire and you still have guys coming to you, or any other skill like that. I don't know. I'm conflicted on it. I could see where it would be really useful, especially the cooldown part is really nice. But at the same time, I could see completely skipping it as well.
I agree. I'm not only conflicted, I'm a little confused about its actual wording. Taking fire damage reduces cooldown duration for spell tree and reduces duration. The higher the damage, the more powerful the effect. Well, it gives you a passive bonus of 20% fire resistance. That's great. I like that. But it says the higher the damage, the more powerful the effect. You know, so in other words, you're getting even bigger cooldown duration and you fortitude basically because you're reducing negative effect duration. It's basically, you know, burning the bad stuff off you, right? And that would include like, you know, poison, curses, etc. Well, what if I have 100% fire resistance? You know, what if I take no damage? You know, am I getting any effect by baptism of fire? So, you know, I like getting the fire resistance. You know, I don't like getting set on fire. All I have to do is look over at burning and all of its bad effects. And that's basically a no-go for me. I would not want to be set on fire. It just is, it's so negative to be set on fire. You know, I would rather avoid it at all costs. The only reason I ever picked up Baptism by Fire is I was playing Jonah. I wanted more MP, I wanted more pyro power, and I wanted the 20% fire resistance. I did not care at all about Baptism by Fire's active passive. So, yeah.
Yeah, it is weird. Yeah, I see what you're saying, though. It's a little bit conflicting in that it's saying the more damage you get, the more the effect is, but then at the same time you're adding fire resistance to lower the damage. So yeah, it's a weird one. I think this would be one that you would be totally justified in passing if you weren't going to fill out the entire tree.
Yeah, we're not fans. All right, next one we have Incineration. Active, type target object, range 5+ bonus range, energy 30, cooldown 12, modified by MP and PP, extinguishes a burning enemy, causing a violent explosion in a small area. The explosion deals 9 base times MP and PP fire damage with a chance to ignite each affected target for 2 to 4 turns. Each remaining turn of the extinguished burning increases the spell's damage by 30%, and ignition chance by 100%. Passive bonus, 2.5% pyromantic power. What do you think of this one?
I really like this skill. Just because of how fun it looks. I usually, when I'm playing it, I call it the whoosh skill. Just because of the effect that it does. It's highly situational in that if you're not getting the burn when they're, you know, a few tiles away, you're probably not going to want to use it. But usually when I do pop off, when I'm able to get fire on the enemy, I always go for this, as long as they're, you know, within the enough tiles away from me. And even better if there's an enemy near them. It's just extra free damage, especially early on. You know, this is Treaties. I think this is getting into Treaties 3. Or maybe it's still Treaties 2, but you're not going to have a lot that you can do long range. So it does kind of give you like long range AoE until you start getting into Melting Ray and the others. Yeah, I really like this one. Not even looking at any of the bonuses that it does, the animation is pretty fun.
It took me a while to figure out this ability. I was a lot more reserved in its use than you were. It has a moderate energy cost, a moderate cooldown. You know, the range is still good, 5+ bonus range. Being able to target an object is also interesting. I actually wonder if you can actually target fire on the ground. I'm not positive.
No,
it specifically extinguishes a burning enemy, so I'm gonna say that's not the case.
Yeah, it only works if you have an enemy that's on fire.
Moderate amount of damage. The real interesting thing is that it deals fire damage with a chance to ignite each affected target for 2 to 4 turns. So it would ignite any enemies around them, but not themselves. Correct?
I hadn't actually tried that. I always assumed that if you used it near yourself, then you would hurt yourself like most other skills.
Well, let's say you have two enemies standing next to each other, right? One explodes, and then the other one catches fire. I think that's what's intended, right? Or can you explode them, and then the initial target stays on fire?
No, it extinguishes them. So their burning goes away, but they explode. So that's the
So
trade-off.
what it really comes down to is whether or not you want to have burning on your enemy to feed the flames, basically using Firebolt, or you want to incinerate and get extra damage that way. Obviously, the skill is much better, much better. The more turns that you have fire on them, so it's kind of weird. You could set them on fire, and then you could feed the flames, and then incinerate, because every time you feed the flames, you're getting extra rounds of fire on them, and then you would explode them for a huge amount. Or you could go ahead and set them on fire and then immediately incinerate, and then continue using other spells at range. So it's kind of like a glue to your combo, depending on how far you want to keep them away, or whether or not you want to explode them and catch other guys on fire. It's definitely a useful skill. So rated highly for me, and definitely I think you rate it highly as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of, at least mid-level, it's one of my favorite skills to use right now.
Going on to Flame Saturation. Passive replenishes 5% of max energy each time an enemy within your vision is ignited. Passive bonus 2.5% pyro power and plus 5 flat max energy. What do you feel about this one, Beardo?
I really like this one, actually. I haven't gotten to the point of getting it yet, but considering ignition can happen on, I think, pretty much most of the skills, and it's going to be happening pretty frequently. Yeah, I rate this one pretty highly. I would definitely say this is one you should feel free to get, considering most of the time we're seeing passives that augment a single skill. This one actually covers all skills, and it's very applicable because you're going to be, like I said, igniting people a lot.
I feel like this skill is a necessary skill for the mid game of fire, just because you're going to start feeling an energy crunch. You're going to be using a lot of your fire in conjunction with one another, and if you fight multiple enemies, you may end up running low on energy. You don't feel that as hard with Flame Saturation because, like you said, whenever they're ignited, well, that's the thing about fire. Anything can ignite. Everything deals fire damage, so everything has a good chance to be ignited, and that means you're getting back 5% max energy each time that happens. And of course, they can ignite multiple times, and you're getting multiple energy back. It's kind of like that the inability of Geomancy. It was good because it affected any enemy killed. In this one, it is good because it affects any enemy ignited, and that happens all the time. Plus, it's an energy refresher. I like this ability a lot.
But yeah, it's almost better in that regards because you don't have to kill the enemy; they just have to be on fire. Especially when you're doing more of the AoE skills later on, you're more than like your chances for catching them on fire goes up like exponentially at that point. So
yeah, and that's going to happen unless it's raining.
yeah, basically.
All right, let's move on to Melting Ray. It's active. Type target tile, which is a 3x3 area. Range 5+ bonus range. Energy 30, cooldown 12. Modified by MP and PP. Shoots a ray of fire towards the targeted tile. The ray deals 6 base, multiplied by MP and PP, fire damage to each target it passes through, with a 33 times MP plus PP % chance to ignite them for 2 to 3 turns. When reaching the targeted tile, the ray explodes a small area, dealing 10 base times MP and PP fire damage to all targets hit. Each enemy on the ray's path increases the damage of the explosion by 20%. Passive bonus, 2.5% pyromantic power. How do you feel about this one, Beardo?
Again, I think it's just we're getting to where basically all of the pyromancy skills they look cool and they're just awesome in general. There's really not. It's a very unique skill also in that you're dealing damage in a straight line through enemies. I think the only other time you really do that is in range, with the I think it's called piercing shot. But also on top of that, not only do you get the extra damage through enemies that are in your line of sight, but you also have that huge explosion at the source. So yeah, I mean this one's pretty awesome.
Moderate energy use, moderate cooldown, decent damage, base damage, not as high as some of the other abilities. But what this ability really does, what it really truly does, is it adds the fourth spell to your spell combo. Because you're going to use it at range, then you're going to use Fire Barrage, then you're going to use Blaze, and then you finish it off with Ring of Fire. If they can survive 4 spells by the time they get to you, something is seriously wrong, and you have accidentally aggroed the troll.
Yeah, basically.
The fact that this also has a really great natural chance to ignite makes it especially worthwhile, and it's kind of a combination of a laser and a fireball, because it actually has that 3x3 area at the end of it. I never really rely on each enemy of the raised path increases the damage of the explosion. I usually just shot it at whatever was closest to me. But it was definitely useful to be able to hit a multitude of things in the 3x3 area. Definitely, I feel like this is the B&B spell next to Fire Barrage. Because it was very often in my late game, it was Melting Ray into Fire Barrage and they're dead. Because it dealt such great damage by that time. Melting Ray, because of its length, because of its ability to hit multiple things, super good ability. Definitely highly rated. 5 out of 5 from me. And I think you like it too.
Yep, definitely agreed there.
And I would also agree, it's a lot of the same thing. You said this earlier. It's a lot of the same thing. All of the fire spells are basically awesome one after another. There's not a ton of variety to it, you know. Definitely Geomancy was a lot more complex than Pyromancy. But, I mean, Pyromancy is kind of doing what it says it's doing, and that's basically chucking fire. And it is not disappointing. Going on to our next ability, we have Magma Rain, which again is more of the same. Active ability, type, target area 3x3, range 5 plus bonus range, energy 20, cooldown 16. Rains magma over a small area, dealing 5 base times MP times PP fire damage and setting some of the tiles on fire. It leaves a puddle of magma for 5 plus MP plus PP turns. I'm not sure that's completely... I don't know how that actually would math out, but... Standing in magma deals 2 base times MP times PP fire damage with 5% chance to ignite and applies 5% fire resistance each turn. Passive bonus 2.5 pyromantic power. How do you feel about this one?
This one is definitely pretty cool. I like all the different effects that it has. It looks very cool when you use it, obviously, along with all the other pyromancy skills. I do think that it is important to point out, while all the skills do seem the same, they are all have some slight variation to them. But yeah, I would almost think, and I hate to say it, but this might be one that you could actually pass up if you're not looking to use all of your skill points. Just because it's not dealing direct damage, it's only dealing damage while they're on the tile.
No, it does do fire damage.
Oh, it
does
does?
do direct damage. It does a base of 5. So it's not a lot. But
Yeah, it's pretty low compared to the...
damage.
Yeah, it's pretty low compared to the others.
Mm-hmm. So I would agree. I think the assessment is spot on. Kind of when I look at this, it's basically a redo of Melting Ray, except different, you know? And Melting Ray does the job better. That's not to say that Magma Rain doesn't have specific instances where it would be good. Again, against the troll, anything that would apply additional fire resistance. And if we ever run into things that have a ton of fire resistance to them, maybe in an icy area, you know, or whatnot, this might be able to shine a little bit more. But as it is, Melting Ray suits the purpose, and you don't necessarily need to have it.
So. It might help in the rain as well, along with the other ones that lower fire resistance. So it's nice in those regards.
True. That's true. And then, of course, if you're fighting a ton of enemies and you just kind of want to block off one direction, Magma Rain could be helpful too. But at the same time, we're about to talk about another ability that does that even better. So, is it worth it? Overall, we're going to kind of give it a meh. For me, at any rate.
Yeah, I agree.
Going on to our next ability, we have Safe Distance. It's a passive. Increases the range of pyromancy spells by 1 tile. Passive bonus, plus 2.5% pyromantic power, and minus 3% fumble chance. How do you feel about that, Beard?
I mean, anything that's going to give an additional tile of range, I think is pretty good. At the same time, I would be a little bit hesitant compared to some of the other passives that we saw. I don't know, because there's enough stuff that you can do, like having the pyromancy. The pyromancer staff gives bonus range. You can get enough perception to get bonus range. It might be one that's worth skipping, but then again, it's like I'm pretty maxed out on my range, and you can see how far I can fire off my fire barrages. So I don't know, I'm a little bit conflicted on this one as well.
I am actually not conflicted. I like the spell a lot, primarily because a lot of the spells are based off of bonus range. It basically is going to give you a huge bonus to being able to put your spells out there. I found Safe Distance in combination with the Pyromancy staff to be of great use, simply because, you know, I was able to choose how I fought and where I fought. You know, I could use 2 long-distance spells, usually Melting Ray or Fire Barrage or something like that, to melt down a guy, and then walk away from the other 3 that were coming at me in all the other directions. And then I would get it again and blast another one down to 2 turns and walk away again. Sure, you can do that, you know, with what you have at your disposal anyway, but it's easier when you have even greater distance to your spells. It just means you're getting off more shots, and you're picking your angles. I would agree that when we're coming to determining, you know, what is worth a point or not, it can be a talent point. What is worth a talent point? How much do you need to get to make it worthwhile? Is open for discussions, particularly when it comes to these passive skills that only basically give you 1 active passive and then passive bonuses. But there is no bad passive bonus to this. It is all useful to me, you know, no matter what kind of build you want to do. But it's not bad either. So I can see your hesitation that, you know, you might not necessarily want to use it, that you could pass it up. But considering all of the active spells that we've had up to this point and not a lot of good passives, you know, because there's also that Baptism of Fire that we passed up, I think it's worth it. I like the passive. You know, I rate it high. But that's me.
Yeah, I think we've only come across 2 that I would probably rate higher than this one. But yeah, it's definitely... it's not... You can pass it, but at the same time, I could see you totally wanting to get it for the additional range.
And that's fair. I mean, if you want to do 15 perception and use the staff, you can do that as well. Or you can put your talent point into this, you know. It will actually save you a talent point if you decide not to take it. But I'm fine with the point investment because I'm also getting that pyromantic and fumble chance, and I hate fumbling my spells. So in this instance, I think it's worth it. Going on to our next ability, we have Excess Heat. It is a passive. It replenishes 5% of maximum energy for each enemy killed with all pyromantic spells. Passive bonus 2.5% pyromantic power, plus 3% energy restoration. How do you feel about this one?
This one is really good. Actually, I hadn't really looked at this one before. I would say this is a definite passive that you would need to get. Getting energy replacement from any of the pyromantic spells that kill. I mean, if you're a pyromancer, that's what you're going to be killing guys with. It's going to be pretty rare that you're going to be finishing them off with your staff. So the additional energy restoration percentage is nice as well. So yeah, I would rate this one very highly, if not one of the highest rated ones that we've come across so far for passives.
So the main comparison we can make to this one is actually within the same tree, and that's Flame Saturation. Just as a reminder, Flame Saturation replenishes 5% max energy every time an enemy is ignited, and it gives plus 5 max energy as its unique passive bonus. I believe we liked that one, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So this is pretty much in line with that. I remember I had energy problems until I got both of these. Starting with, Flame Saturation and then eventually picking up Excess Heat. This is great, but it's in a certain sense, it kind of it has a negative in that you have to kill them. Now that's really great when you're fighting normal enemies, against the troll or boss or something like that. That might be tougher. Maybe even like a bear, not so great, because you're not killing them. But against most enemies, Excess Heat is wonderful, and its passive bonus is good too. I agree, highly rated, but just keep that in mind. The tougher the enemy, the less powerful Excess Heat can be, unless you are completely melting things. In which case, it's fine to have anyway.
I mean,
but any kind of energy replenisher, I think, typically is going to be highly rated, especially for any kind of class that uses as much energy as magic does.
Yeah, especially pyro too. I do see one negative in that if you're getting a lot of kills off of just burning enemies without actually killing, like using a spell to end them, that could also be a negative to this spell and to this bonus.
I didn't even think of that. If they die from burning, the 3.5% max HP from burning, we would not get that energy back.
Yep, that's what I was just thinking.
That's a good point. Very good point. Did not think of that. But you know what? Still worth it, I think. It's a slight dampener to the ability, but still good.
And it makes you think in regards to the Magma Rain and Inferno, because those spells are putting down fire for them to walk into and die from burning or from that damage. I would be curious if those also trigger the energy restoration, like if them just being affected by those spells.
It depends if they're dying to the spell damage or if they're dying to the burn damage. The magma damage, I don't know. Does the magma damage count as the spell damage? So yeah, I don't know about Magma Rain. I think Magma Rain is definitely the spell that is most iffy, whereas Inferno, which is our next ability we'll be talking about, I think is fine, unless of course it's burning again. But it deals a large amount of active spell damage, so I think you're more likely to kill them with the Inferno damage than they are to die to the burning damage. But you still have a good point. If it's the burning damage that kills them, no energy back.
Well, and I think too, there's an order to it as well, to where in the turn your spell damage is going to do the damage before the burning, but I could still see where you do just enough to get them to have 2 or 3% health, and then burning is what ends them. So yeah, just something to think about.
Yeah, good point. Great point. Going on to our next ability, we have Inferno. Is an active type, target area 5x5, range of 5, energy of 50, cooldown of 30. Very large energy cost, very long cooldown cost, relatively speaking. Modified by MP and PP. Summons a firestorm over a large area. Standing in the area of effect deals 10 times MP and PP fire damage each turn. For each enemy in the area of effect, the damage is increased by 15%. Passive bonus 2.5%. Very basic, straightforward ability. How do you feel about this one, Beardo?
I definitely like this one a lot. The animation is awesome, even more so than Earthquake. I mean, Earthquake is pretty cool. I guess that would basically be the comparison skill. It seems to do much more damage than Earthquake, minus having that daze chance. But yeah, I definitely like this one. This is very highly rated. High energy cost, but it's a pretty big payoff, because if you pop that off with an ambush coming towards you or more than one enemy, they're not gonna make it going through that wall, those 5 tiles of fire that they have to walk through.
We were talking about walls when it came to Geomancy and the different ones that you could put up, and using Earthquake as a wall was kind of more of like you hit them with a random assortment of things. We're never really expecting the damage to just straight up kill them. That is different from Inferno. Inferno deals quite a large amount of damage. They could take 5 instances of damage before they even get to you. And each one of those has its own ability, Ignite. It doesn't have any bonus chance to do so, but it's still good enough to get them burning because it's fire on the ground. And if you actually hit multiple people with it, it increases the damage, but I never reliably do that. I usually set it up as a wall and let them walk through it, and it does its job immensely well. Inferno is definitely one of those great tools to use against the troll. The only drawbacks to it are the range set at 5. You cannot increase it further, or with any kind of instance, as far as I know. Not even well, I don't know how safe distance actually works with that. It might actually increase it, but I know it doesn't get bonus range. At least it doesn't say it does. Other than that, it has very high energy costs, and as you know, we don't exactly get energy reductions in Pyromancy, so that's going to be a big investment of your energy, and a cooldown with 30. You need to use it wisely, but when you do, you can completely block off a certain direction, and nothing coming through that is normal will live. Great spell, in my opinion. I think you share that sentiment.
Yeah, and I think that it's not affected by that bonus range, because it looks like essentially that 5 tile radius, or that radius or range, is always going to be the 5 tiles next to you. It didn't look like it went out much farther than that, and I can't imagine it being less than that, because then you would basically be casting it on you or cutting it off outside of the range.
Yeah, so, and definitely with it covering such a high area, if it were to go out much further than that, it might be too good. Definitely one of my choice spells, 5 out of 5 from me, when I've got the energy and cooldown to use it.
Absolutely.
Let's go on to our next and final Pyromancy ability. It is a passive Pyromania. Finally, we get to a a skill that describes Pyromancy in total. Pyromania passive. Each burning enemy within your vision grants you plus 5% magic power and plus 3% crit chance. Passive bonus 2.5 pyro and a straight bonus of 5% magic power. How do you feel about this one?
I mean, it's one of those ones where it looks really good, but it's very situational, and that you have to have, like, normally you're really only going to have at most like one enemy that's burning at any given time. I mean, I guess if you use Inferno or something like that, or the magma rain, and you can have multiple guys walking over and igniting, then this would really come into effect. But like I said, it's really situational. It's kind of a weird one, in that I would probably pick excess heat way before I would pick this one. Then magic power, the plus 5% to magic power is nice though.
I can agree. I can see your point of view, but I think I rate it just slightly higher than what you might be saying. It's got very nice passive bonuses, right? That's just a straight damage buff. And for each burning enemy within your vision, you get the 5% magic power and crit chance. Now, I think the real conflict here is, if something's on fire, we want it to be dead. We don't want it to remain burning. But that being said, as long as they're burning, you're getting this buff, and the buff itself is 3% crit chance and 5% magic power. The way I compare this is, if it was simply a talent that gave us 2.5 Pyromancy, 10% magic power, and 3% crit chance, would we take it? I think we would. Because since any of our spells can set them to burn, and we want them to burn to at least some degree, because we want magic back from, flame saturation and what's the other one? Excess heat, we're going to be getting at least some magic power and crit chance at some point that we're chucking spells at our enemies. So we're going to see this proc a lot. It won't always stick around, but we'll still usually get it around for at least one spell, maybe two. And if we're getting 3% crit chance off that, I think it's worth it. But I would agree it's maybe like a middle choice. I'm going to get the spells that matter and the passives that matter to me before I pick this up. But eventually I do pick it up. I like getting that extra magic power. I like getting that extra crit.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've come across maybe 3 or 4 other passives that I would definitely choose before this, but I would not put this at the end of the list of the passives to get. Just for the additional bonuses are nice enough. And then, yeah, I mean, if you're fighting more than one enemy and you get one of them burning, then it's just all the better.
It doesn't feel powerful enough for a tier 4 book talent. And that's the problem that we had in Geomancy. It seems like there's a subpar passive that's good, but not great. And when we get the tier 4, we expect great.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Well, especially with Magic, because the only way that you can get those tier 4 books right now is through dungeons. Or through, like, a Pyromancer will drop them. That's the only way you can get them right now. So, yeah, if you're putting in that amount of time where you're just grinding dungeon after dungeon after dungeon just to get that number 4, you would expect something really high tier as a passive. So, no, I definitely agree with you on that. Maybe if it was... I mean, I don't know how you would make it better. I wouldn't want to say any enemy in your vision. So, I mean, I see where the burning comes into play, as that's, like, the main thing that you're trying to do with Pyromancy. But, I don't know. I just feel like something could be a little bit better with it. But at the same time, it is pretty great as passives go.
What I would do is I would eliminate the magic power bonus. And I would buff the crit chance. I might make it 6, maybe even 10% crit, so that when you have burning enemies, you're going to hit for a crap ton on your next spell. At least it improves your chance to hit for a crap ton because you're going to crit off that spell. That's what I would do. That's how I would make it more exciting. All right, that finishes up our review of Pyromancy. We'll go over a quick statistical review of the Pyromancy gear. Once again, I'm just going to go ahead and say, you have a choice between Exquisite Mantle and Pyromancy Mantle, but honestly, you should just use Pyromancy Mantle. You're getting so much from it, that fits with what you want to do. For the Pyromancy Mantle, we have 3% physical resist, magic resistance 10, fire resistance 25, frost resistance 5. It gives crit chance as its special, +5, and fumble chance -5, which is great. Energy resto 2, spells energy cost -10%, and pyromantic power +30. It basically gives everything that we want in a on a chess piece for being able to do fire. And then the Pyromancer's staff gives a huge bonus to pyromantic power, and it gives +1 range, which is great for pyromancers. As mentioned before, you don't actually have to pick up that extra talent to compensate for your range abilities. By taking the Pyromancy staff and basically just running with it. And what's really great about the Pyromancy staff, I think even more over than the Pyromantic power and bonus range is it gives that plus 25% flat energy bonus, so it gives you more energy to work with. You know, and as we've said, the energy costs can be really high on some of those spells, and since you're constantly chucking them, you know, you're not trying to weave them so much. Well, you do weave them in and out, but since you're basically chucking one after another as often as you can to deal as much damage as you could possibly output, having all that energy bonus is very, very nice, particularly for the Pyromancer staff. So definitely recommend the Pyromancer set. There's not too many options beyond that. You can experiment with like the Chronomancer if you want to, but Pyromancer all the way.
Yeah, and I've almost been thinking too that it might come to a point when there's more areas unlocked that you're gonna be basically picking your outfit based on the environment. So like if we get some kind of like cold mountain environment, even if you're not a Pyromancer, you'll probably go with Pyromancer, or you go like Cryomancer, or if like there's some volcano or like desert theme, then you probably get the Pyromancer one. That's really the only thing that I can think of in really doing variations, other than, like we said, the Chronomancer. If you have the staff and you have both pieces, the cowl and the chest piece, you can get a whopping minus 66% to your cooldowns, which might be enough for you that it would outweigh having the magic, you know, having the power, extra pyromantic power or geo power. But other than that, it didn't really seem like any of the new items that were added would be enough that you would ditch your additional pyro or geo power. You would still use those.
Just because we want to focus on damage and the power of our spells. So you have some options, but we recommend, or at least I recommend, you recommend, right, as well, stick with Pyro.
Yeah.
Just because it's just going to get the job done in the way that you want.
Yeah, they all synergize very nicely together.
So we've talked about Geomancy and Pyromancy. That is our rundown and review for this episode of the Stoneshard podcast, episode 5. We now come to the final bit where we give our judgments. Beardo, what do you think? Geomancy versus Pyromancy, who will reign supreme?
I mean, it is a rather hard one. Each one has their pros and cons for sure. The Pyromancy definitely looks very cool. The Geomancy as well. And weighing the passives seem to be about the same. We're about 50-50 use of useful passives. I don't know. It's very difficult. I would probably, just because of my experience with it, I would probably go Geomancy. I really like some of those endgame spells like Boulder Toss and Runic Explosion are pretty nutso to see. Earthquake is a really unique spell as well compared to Inferno, since it does the daze damage as well. So I think at the end of the day, if I had to choose between pure Pyro or pure Geo, I would go Geomancy.
That's a good choice. I agree. This is pretty much another very tough choice because both of them are so good at the jobs they decide to do. But I have a clear winner for me, and that's going to be Pyromancy. Do not get me wrong. I love both trees. I think they're both great. But when it came down to it, Pyromancy is fun to play, you know? I love to go basically Trogdor on all my enemies and just burninate their towns. And there's nothing quite as satisfying as just laying down a wasteland of fire for them to basically die in. Even with the contention of rain being a real damper on the playstyle, it's so powerful to basically just sling all that damage and mow stuff down. Pyromancy definitely got a big thumb up from me as being a very easy and fun school to play. when I did play Geomancy, I had different varying levels of success. Typically, Geomancy worked best when I was able to pair it with bases. But when I tried to pair it with staves and other types of weaponry, it wasn't very... I had a hard time. In particular with staves, I had a very hard time using it with other types. And it just didn't seem to work very well for me. In fact, when I tried to play it single, like just straight Geomancy, I even had a hard time because I didn't have great sources of damage. You know, in order for it to really get rolling, you need stone spikes, and I think stone spikes is gated by Geo2. So if you don't get Geo2, it's really hard to get rolling. And if you don't get rolling, you never really get to experience the greatness of the school or of the build. And you don't have those problems so much with Pyromancy because you have great damage spells from the very get-go with Ring of Fire and Fire Barrage. So for me, Pyromancy, my definite preference.
I mean, you do bring up some good points, especially ease of use. I think beginner players are going to find it much easier to start with Pyromancy compared to Geomancy. At the same time, I think that Geomancy does mesh well with a lot of other skills, especially the early on skills like Stone Armor and Runic Boulder. I think they could be used for a lot more than just mages. I would even think that playing Pyromancy, you're probably going to want to at least try to get Stone Armor and steal from Geomancy, whereas Geomancy could completely ignore any of the Pyromancy spells because there's not much variation. They all burn, they all do burning damage, whereas there are some interesting mechanics that go along with Geomancy, from throwing boulders to petrifying and turning your enemies into stone, things like that. So yeah, I don't think it's an easy comparison. So I think we both see the other side, and it's a rather tough choice to make.
Yeah, I like both, but I just like Pyro better. Well, that's going to be it for this episode. If you want to wrap it up.
Oh, I thought you... All right,
we didn't actually just... Okay, we're going to have to do a cut on this, obviously.
Yeah, it's fine. I'll go through.
I didn't know how you wanted to actually do it. Do you want me to do the wrap up and then lead it to you so that you have the ending words?
No, I think that's we were supposed to do it. I'm supposed to wrap it up. You say your thing, and then I say the final peace out, and then we end it. So
yeah, because it's going to be on your channel.
Yeah, I'll cut it. I'll cut it out. It's not a big deal.
Okay.
All right. All right, so that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Stoneshard Podcast. Definitely let us know in the comments what you think, what other topics you'd like to see. This was very heated and a little bit longer than our usual, but we had many skills and many things to discuss. Make sure to check out everything on my channel. I do regular Stoneshard Let's Plays. I do edited content centering around Stoneshard, the game updates, lore, tutorials, things like that. And I also do semi-regular live streams on Sunday. Also, make sure to check out DarLeeLlama's channel.
You can find me at DarLeeLlama on YouTube. I hope you had as much fun listening us debate as we did talking for you. Don't forget to check out my vids at 12 and 12. That's 12 at noon and 12 at midnight. Be sure to hit like and subscribe to help support our channels. Don't forget to hit or leave a comment if you have something to say. We definitely read them. And take care, stay safe, and have a wonderful day. This is DarLeeLlama signing off.
This is Beardodood. We'll see you on the next one. Peace.
Peace.